It's a year since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. He says his plan for the UK is working, but with a general election next year, time may be running out. So what do voters here in Motherwell think about the big issues of the day? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to put your questions to the people in power, answering them on our panel this evening. From the SNP, the MSP from Motherwell and Wishaw, and convener of the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee, Clare Adamson. Born and raised in Wishaw, Clare worked in IT, including at SNP headquarters. She entered politics in 2011 and became the first ever SNP MSP for this area 7 years ago. Former Olympic athlete and Scottish Conservative MSP for the South of Scotland, Brian Whittle, also with us tonight. Brian represented Britain on the track 45 times before entering politics in 2016. He's now the party spokesperson for business, economic growth and tourism. From Scottish Labour, the MSP for Central Scotland, Monica Lennon, a former party health spokesperson. Monica stood against Anna Sarwar for the Scottish Labour leadership, a vocal campaigner on drug and alcohol harm, mental health and women's rights as well. She received international acclaim for introducing legislation which made Scotland the first country in the world to make period products freely available. Also with us tonight is the journalist and commentator Joan McAlpine, born in Gourock and brought up in Greenock. Joan's a columnist for the Sunday Post and Holyrood magazine. Previously, she spent 10 years as an SNP MSP for the South of Scotland and was once a parliamentary liaison officer to former First Minister Alex Salmond. And finally, the chairman of Motherwell Football Club, Jim McMahon. Down the years, Jim has been a bricklayer's labourer, a milkman, a tax inspector, an accountant and a businessman. He was the founding partner of investment firm West Coast Capital alongside Sir Tom Hunter and has been called one of the UK's leading advisors to entrepreneurs. On top of all that, he's released his debut crime novel, a dream he says has been 70 years in the making. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And, of course, welcome to our studio audience. It's great to be with you here in Motherwell for the first time. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you are in Scotland. BBCDN is the hashtag you need on social media. Give us a follow at BBC Debate Night. And our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after this show. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Sam Daly. Sam.
Hi, good evening. Given that North Lanarkshire Council announced the plan to close a large amount of leisure facilities 4 weeks ago due to underfunding, is the First Minister's announcement of a council tax freeze another nail in the coffin of local services for those who can at least afford to lose them?
Thank you, Sam. The council went on to reverse that decision to close 39 local facilities, including swimming pools, libraries, but say finances remain dire. Monica Lennon, you're a former councillor. You know the pressures that they are under at the moment.
Yeah, and that's councillors of all parties and none right across Scotland, because local government has been decimated since the SNP came into power in 2007. So councils are making some really tough, horrible decisions. So I'm pleased that that decision has been reversed in North Lanarkshire in terms of the really important leisure and community facilities that we all need in our local areas.
So you want to see council tax going up then, do you?
Well, in terms of the council tax freeze, what we haven't heard is it going to be fully funded? I think the Scottish Government are saying it will be, but they've promised this before. So in the past, when we've had council tax frozen, there hasn't been funding in place to make sure that councils can continue to keep services running, can continue to employ people locally to deliver education, social work, you know, keep the roads safe and so on. So what we actually need is a much bigger discussion in the Parliament about council tax reform, because people might remember, you might have voted SNP because back in 2007 they promised to get rid of the council tax altogether. Well, guess what? That hasn't happened, and we've got councils from SNP, Labour, Conservative, all the way through having to make some really horrible decisions. People have come through the pandemic. We're in a cost of living crisis. So what we actually need is investment in public services, and we need councils to be empowered to make decisions that are best for their local areas. But on final point I'll make, because I've been writing to both the UK Government and the Scottish Government. The UK Government did make more funding available to come to Scotland for swimming pools, for example, because they're very expensive to run and to maintain. That money hasn't been passed to councils for swimming pools. So that's one example of where is that money going, and can we use some of that money to put it into local communities?
Okay. Sam, who asked the question, would you have been prepared to see your council tax go up to be able to support local services and local facilities?
On the council tax, although the specific question was on the 4 weeks ago on leisure facilities, it's not just leisure facilities. That money has now been put aside for leisure facilities, possibly. Where's it going to be cut? Because essentially what we have, I believe the SNP's statement on how they're going to make up the lack of a rise in council tax is councils will then go to central government. They will then put a case forward for money to come from central government, which will then pay for whatever they need to do. Now, this smacks to me of central government trying to control a devolved government, which is exactly what the SNP are claiming Westminster is doing to Scotland by removing powers from them or holding back money from them. And this is exactly what's happening with the councils. Right. The councils know where best to spend the money in their community. Would you rather be £20 off better in your pocket at the end of the year and your mother can't get a stair lift from the council? It's as simple as that. Something has to go.
OK, well, hands up on that, because I'd love to hear from all of you on that. But Clare Adamson, as the local MSP here, who knew how important these services are to these people, this announcement was a surprise to COSLA. It was a surprise to the Greens. Was it a surprise for you as well? Were you disappointed by it?
I'm not disappointed by it because, first and foremost, like me, Hamza Yousaf is a constituency MSP. And what we hear from our constituents and the caseload we are dealing with at the moment is about the cost of living crisis, about families being really hard pushed to meet their bills. And we have successfully delivered a council tax freeze in the past. And I think giving that surety to families going forward is just a small relief in what is the biggest financial crisis that our constituencies are facing at the moment. Now, in terms of how this works, so Monica has just, we've had a talk about where the power lies to make the decisions. So we believe that the council should be able to make their own decisions, but we also believe that Scotland should be able to make its decisions about how its money is spent. So often there are what called consequentials from spending at Westminster, but we make the decision about how we feel that is best used in Scotland. And I think that's right, and I think that it's then right that the councils have to look after things. But the Scottish Government is unique. Councils can borrow money, Scottish Government can't. So we are living within the constraints of austerity budgets from Westminster. And while we're doing that, then the financial situation is very, very difficult and will remain so.
OK, let me hear from the audience. The lady with her hand up there. Yes.
If the cost of living crisis, etc., is such an important, why are we then fighting Westminster Government on the Gender Recognition Bill and wasting so much money, taking it through courts?
OK. Thank you. Let me just stay where we are. We may come back, but let me just stay where we are on this specific local issue around services. Gentleman here with his hand up. Yes.
Well, I think it's commendable that North Lanarkshire Council has rowed back on closing down libraries and swimming pools. Perhaps the panel are not aware that North Lanarkshire has eliminated school librarians and closed down school libraries. The school that I worked in, the school librarian is now working in a charity shop. She provided a focus for a lot of children who were vulnerable, who were needy, and so her duties went way beyond just cataloguing books. And schools now do not have libraries.
Brian Whittle.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very good point. And I think that for me, when we starve our councils of finance, it's a false economy, because if we take the money out of that page of the ledger, it appears on another page of the ledger. We look at our councils to, as we talked about swimming pools, we talked about, you know, all the leisure facilities and music and art and drama and all the things, these things that are so important to our communities. If you take that away, what ends up happening is there's a requirement of our health budget to go up, of our education budget to go up, of our welfare budget to go up, of our, you know, the police budget goes up. You know, it's this silo looking, the way that the Scottish Government do this. They look in a silo, and actually we need to look across portfolio. It used to be that councils got a third of the budget, and health got a third of the budget. And what's happened is we're reducing council budgets all the time, and the health budget is going up and up and up.
So give more money to the Scottish Government. Clare's point is there's a limit to what she can do with the Scottish Government can do with the budget that they have.
£67 billion that the Scottish Government have to spend. £67 billion. They're very quick to tell us that they have a record investment into the health service, but it's outcomes that happen. It's not just about the money. It's not just about the money that you get. It's how you spend that money, and it is being spent really, really poorly by this Scottish Government.
Lady with the glasses there, yes.
What I would like to say is, and it's going back to Clare's point, is Clare, I'm an independent supporter, but I'm not an SNP supporter. I was for 40 years, and I couldn't possibly vote for you now. You've had at least 5 mandates to get Scotland independence, and you haven't used it as a party in Westminster. So we could be sitting here not talking about the Barnett formula. We could be sitting here with money in our pocket and able to fund our councils properly.
Clare Adamson.
You're absolutely right. We have had the mandate to have independence and another independence referendum. We are bound by the UK Constitution at the moment, and the UK... Sorry, but somebody's been arguing about money wasted in the courts. Part of that challenging of the Section 35 order, regardless of what it is it's the first time Westminster have turned around and said the Scottish Parliament can't legislate on an area where devolution gives us the power to do so. So devolution is changing all of the time. And post-Brexit, what we're seeing is executive power being taken at Westminster to make decisions about Scotland. So no one wants to have an independent Scotland more than myself. I grew up in this area. It was the closure of Ravenscraig that brought me to the independence, and that was about independence within Europe as an independent country, and we could have saved our steel mill.
Okay, I want to get back to the question. We're losing sight of the question, which is about local services here for the people in this room. Jim McMahon.
I was just going to say the same thing. We're drifting from the point here. I think there are 2 or 3 things. A personal thing. When I grew up in Carluke, going to the library was one of the most important things I did. That and kicking a football about.
Your book is dedicated to the local library.
Yes, yeah. I was better at the library than I was at football, I'll be honest with you. As many Motherwell supporters here will probably tell you. This is, to me, symptomatic and endemic of the fact that the system's not working just now. Yep. It's not working, and it's not working because very few local authorities, councils, politicians are allowed to take a longer-term view. Views are driven by an election cycle or what money's about on the day, and that is not a good way to run a railroad. It's a terrible way to run a railroad because you get, Brian says, things shifted from here into there, into the rest of it. If we had the honesty to sit and say it's not working, how can we make it better? How can we allocate better? How can we give more power to local government? We might get to a better position. And to be honest with you, saying that it's someone else's fault, we really should be able to solve aspects of this within Scotland without blaming anybody else about it and sitting and saying, how the hell do we do it? So I think there's more that can be done, but I think it demands an honesty from politicians and from people in power to say, this isn't working. And it's clearly not working. Let's actually try and find a solution that we can get more uniformity around.
Back to the audience, man in the front row here.
Yeah, I would just say, I just think it's a bit rich for the Conservatives, to be honest with you, that come out and say, obviously, that there's a budget of £67 billion. I mean, if they forget what happened with Liz Truss, for example, who crashed the economy, that's why this country... That's why this country is in the state that it's in just now. And the only way that we can get out of this, as far as I'm concerned, is to have a democratic vote. And the mechanisms to get that democratic vote is to have independence to sort our own affairs out.
Thank you. Gentleman in the middle there. Yes. On you go.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say the same point towards Brian. But what I will say towards Clare and the SNP is I can't get my head around how we can have a council tax freeze when we're actually cutting budgets to local councils. You know, we've seen that with North Lanarkshire, which we've touched on, and I'm in North Lanarkshire, so my son and my daughter was going to be impacted with that. That's been taken away. Sounds to me like it was politically taken away. But how can you possibly have a council tax freeze when everybody's talking about cutting services? I can't get my head around that.
Right, just briefly, Clare, because you've spoken a bit about this already, but
So
just respond to that man, please.
It is about the priorities of the Scottish Government, and if they choose to fully fund the council tax freeze, which they've said they will do, now the quantum of that and the decision-making that's happening between then and COSLA, what I can say is in the past, councils had the opportunity to take the 3% from the Scottish Government or to raise council tax to the level that they wanted. It was never they always had the flexibility to raise it more. So the councils will still have an opportunity to do that if they feel that what's provided by the Scottish Government doesn't get there. But we have committed to fully fund that, and we appreciate that this is something, well, we don't know yet.
So you announced
we don't know
at
yet.
a conference to get a headline and to get a clap at SNP conference. You don't even know how much. So to the point made by Jim, this is back to the cigarette packet. How can you take a long-term view when Humza Yousaf at a conference is just saying something without talking to his own cabinet, his own councillors, or COSLA? What about the Verity Agreement? Tell people in the audience about the Verity Agreement, Verity House. Not worth the paper it's written on.
So this has been stated as a Scottish Government priority. We delivered the council tax freeze to the benefit of everyone in this room through the same announcements and the same promises in our manifesto. So I'm sure this will happen. And we know that as a result of that, council tax is lower in Scotland than it is in the rest of the UK. And that's just one of the benefits from the priorities that the Scottish Government have done in the past to put money back in people's pockets. This is an exceptional circumstance. We have never faced a cost of living crisis like this. It takes me back to the closure of Ravenscraig and the poverty levels that I experienced growing up here. Yeah. And I know that my caseload is full of people who are really, really struggling at the moment.
The Verity House Agreement was intended to create better relations between COSLA and the Scottish Government. COSLA arms up over this. Joan McAlpine, what do you think?
I'm just glad I'm not in politics anymore. But you know, the fact is that Liz Truss did crash the economy just over a year ago, and that doesn't go away. We're all still paying the price for that. But also, you know, to address Monica's point, you know, like Scottish Labour and UK Labour are moving to that middle ground as well. I mean, all the time I was in Parliament, Scottish Labour were asking the Scottish Government to raise taxes, and now they're positioning themselves as a lower tax party. So I think we need a little bit more honesty here. I'm with Jim. I mean, the point that he made about looking at longer-term funding was the same point that the Accounts Commission made recently with regards to local authority funding. That year-on-year funding for local authorities, it doesn't allow you to plan. I now run a small charity, and a lot of charities work on year-to-year funding, and it's really, really difficult to plan ahead. So I think we need to look at local government. I also think we need to look at, people like to talk about local democracy and leaving power with local authorities. If you look at the behaviour of North Lanarkshire Council over the last few years, in fact, over the last few decades, I mean, they're not a great advertisement for local democracy. They're fighting like ferrets in a sack. They had a huge legal case that they settled for over £1 million. It cost them over £1 million, an unfair dismissal case recently, I understand. Their budget is short by $5 million a year. That's why they're closing these leisure facilities. And yet they hand out $1 million to settle a legal case that they were advised to settle for a lot less money a few years ago. So I think we need to look at the quality of local authorities if we want to devolve more spending. I'm actually quite happy that the government ring-fence social care and things like that, because I wouldn't be confident with some local authorities leaving vulnerable people in their hands, to be perfectly honest with you.
These pressures replicated around Scotland. So your views on all of this from home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Tonight we're in Motherwell. Next week we're going to be in Stirling. The week after that we're going to be in Aberdeen for a climate change special. So if you'd like to be in the audience for either of those shows, just go to the address on your screen right now, click on the links and come along and get involved. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from John Hewitt. John, good evening.
Good evening. Is Rishi Sunak still right to stand with Israel if they continue to make airstrikes on Gaza, killing innocent civilians, particularly children, and not allowing humanitarian aid through?
Thank you. At First Minister's questions today, Rishi Sunak called for pauses in fighting to allow aid in, but not for a ceasefire. Mary Black said in Parliament today, how much worse does this situation have to get before that happens? Brian Whittle.
It's absolutely horrendous situation, and I think the first thing we should acknowledge here is that there are civilians on both sides who have lost their lives, and there are people from both sides who are obviously devastated by the loss of family members. So, in my view, nobody wins in a war. However, you know, this cry for a ceasefire, how many of us would be confident Hamas would acknowledge a ceasefire? And it all comes back to me we cannot forget what started this off in a terrorist organisation targeted women and children and brutalised them, raped and murdered them, took them hostage into the Gaza Strip, and are hiding, and we've got a terrorist organisation that are hiding behind them. We do need to eliminate Hamas for Israel's sake. We do need to eliminate Hamas for Palestine's sake. But I think that without question, we do need to have a humanitarian corridor open to allow aid to get into Palestine. It's a horrendous situation. I think at the moment, I look around the world, I think the world's on fire, and my worry here is because of what Hamas has started and the response from Israel is that the next stage, because actually we were going very well in Israel, Middle East, because trade is the way to deal with the issues out there. And Israel was trading with Jordan, it was trading with Egypt, it was trading with Qatar, trading with other, and it was we're looking at trading with Saudi Arabia. And I think Iran's the culprit here because they certainly don't want that. They thrive on that instability. But we certainly should, to me, this lands solely with Hamas. I don't know how it would be for you if you had an organisation next door to you whose only raison d'etre was to wipe you out and kill every Jew on the planet. How you would deal with that? How would we deal with it if a terrorist organisation had come in and murdered and slaughtered 1,000 of our colleagues in say in Glasgow? What would we ask our government to do? But my question is this: if Israel are not allowed to defend themselves, who is going to do it?
Lady in the audience there.
I think you forget Israel has been terrorising Palestine for like a lot of years now, right? And you're trying to say when they fight back that they're getting terrorised when Israel has been killing or even putting Palestinians in a small piece of land, making them all forced to go to one side of it and then blowing up a hospital apparently, but they're trying to say that it wasn't them who attacked as well. When it's so obvious that they did.
Well, no matter what we said, what side we sit between Palestine and Israel, it doesn't matter which side you sit on.
They're murdering Jews, right?
Sorry.
But they've been murdering innocent Palestinians for a lot of years.
Yeah, but it does not. Whatever side of that side, and I'm
it's quite unfair for civilians. Understand that.
Sorry, let him answer the point. On you go.
It doesn't matter which side of the side, and you should. And I'm not on any. I'm on a community side. I just see people people going about their business, people like us who just want to live their lives, want to grow up, want to meet somebody, love somebody, have a family. That's what I see. But we cannot get away from the fact that Hamas deliberately targeted women and children and slaughtered them. They came over and slaughtered them. If that happened in this country, what would we ask our government to do?
Yeah, you made that point. Man on the front row down here. Yes, on you go.
Calling for a ceasefire. Why don't we put pressure on Egypt to open its borders, to let the people of Gaza leave, so it's only Hamas that's left, and Israel can bomb and do what we've got to do? Hamas need to be eliminated. They have to, for the sake of both Israel and Palestine, like Brian says. Middle East is a complex situation. There's rights and wrongs on both sides, and there's people here very opinionated, by the looks of it, and there's people dying. Put pressure on Egypt. Tell them to open their borders, take all the refugees, and anybody that wants to leave Gaza, and let Israel do what they have to do, which is wipe Hamas from the face of the earth.
Joan McAlpine.
I think that's a very good point. I think this is a very complex situation, and there are right and wrongs on both sides. And there's been, I have read analysts that say in many ways Benjamin Netanyahu has actually facilitated Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I mean, the thing that I think, to answer the question specifically, I think there should be a pause for humanitarian assistance, definitely. But I just wanted to say something about Hamas, and it's not often I agree with Brian, but the thing that is seared into my mind is a young German woman who was dancing at the festival in southern Israel. You see pictures of her dancing at the festival, and then you see her in the back of a truck, half naked. She looks dead. You know it's her. The men are standing on her. They're spitting on her. Her legs at an odd angle, like she's been raped. These men are shouting religious slogans. There's lots of men in the street. There's no women apart from this poor girl in the back of the truck. They're all celebrating. And these people they're religious zealots. They're misogynists. They're funded by Iran, which is killing women for refusing to wear hijab. You know, these people need to be eradicated. And I don't think it's reasonable to suggest that we should just pull out and let Hamas win. There are faults on both sides, and I think the Israeli government has let down their people as well.
Thank you. Gentleman in the glasses, up there. Yeah.
Hi, I was in Israel last year for a couple of days, nearly a year ago to the day, and we were talking to the tour guide, and the tour guide was talking about the right-wing Jewish community. They're happy for the soldiers of Israel to go and fight, but they're not happy for their own children to serve in the Israeli Defence Force. So that is what's upsetting a lot of the Jews. And that was Jerusalem, that they are happy for their children not to serve, but they're more than happy for their colleagues. And this is what's happened with Netanyahu, if that's his name, is a right-wing Jewish leader. And the party that he was in joint government with was even more right-wing than him.
OK, thank you. And gentleman down here, yes, on you go.
Just to pick up on a couple of your points, Brian, I don't understand how Israel being successful in trading helps the suffering of the Palestinian people, firstly. And then secondly, I think there's a point around whether or not Israel has the right to defend itself, which I totally accept, but it's the proportionality of the reaction and the civilian casualties that have resulted from that.
That's the great unknown in this. What is proportionate in response?
To your first point, trade is the way in which we solve just about every issue, border issue in the world. And Israel started, the border at Palestine was actually open and starting to work much better, and we were going towards that. So that's number one. Proportionality is we're looking at it from, we project what our lives are like and how we would respond into that. And I don't think we can do that. I think that, you know, the ability I mean, Israel's fear, in my view, is that if they had a ceasefire, do we think Hamas would honour that ceasefire? I think not. Would they rearm and do it again? And how would Israel then have to respond to that?
I want to get around to the rest of the panellists. Just hang on a second. Monica Lennon.
Well, as we're sitting here tonight having this discussion, there will be babies, children, men and women losing their lives in Gaza. My heart breaks for the people of Israel and of Palestine for the hell that they're going through. What Hamas did on October 7th, there's no excuse for that. But we can't kid ourselves that this conflict started just a couple of weeks ago. So there are complex layers to this. Right now, I feel quite uncomfortable hearing about sides because there are no winners in this. Innocent people are dying, and I think the gentleman at the front makes a good point about people could be safely moved out of Gaza and at the Rafah crossing at Egypt. But not everyone is able-bodied and able to leave. So right now we've got disabled people, people who are in hospital getting cared already for medical conditions, people who are not able to make that journey. And why should they have to leave their homes?
So
I wouldn't want
should
to have
Keir
to leave
Starmer be calling for a ceasefire then? Because he's trying to hold Labour together on this at the moment, isn't he?
Well, I don't know if it's about holding Labour together. Obviously, he's making decisions in terms of what he thinks the right assessment. And in the heat of TV studios and interviews in the media, people might not always say what they want to say. But look, I don't think that what we're seeing right now is going to make anybody safer. We're seeing innocent babies, children, and people losing their lives. So we do need to see peace. We need to find an end to the violence. And yeah, from my perspective, that is about having a ceasefire and having international diplomacy and everyone trying to pull together here, because this is it's beyond a humanitarian crisis. Words like proportionality right now, when we know that there are babies and children dying, not simply because of the bombing, but because there's no food, there's no supplies, there's no water. And, we all have a connection somehow. I was on holiday the day that this happened. I just got off a 10-hour flight, and the first family I met were a family from Liverpool. I was in Mexico, in Liverpool, and the woman said to me our mother was Israeli, or is Israeli, and they didn't know what was happening to their family. And then you come home and you're seeing very directly the impact on the First Minister's family, his wife Nadia, and what's happening to their family. So this is not something that has no impact on us. Also have to say that what we're seeing in Scotland and across Britain is a rise in Islamophobia, a rise in anti-Semitism because of what's happening all these miles away. So this impacts all of us. People right now, even in Motherwell and in Lanarkshire and across Scotland, feel unsafe because of what's happening. So we need our politicians to pull together, but we need to find peaceful solutions. We need to find them rapidly, because there is no peace process in Israel and Palestine, and there hasn't been for a long time.
Clare Adamson, is Rishi Sunak right to stand with Israel at the moment?
I think, again, it is to characterise it as being standing with Israel and not with justice, I think is the wrong way to look at it. My heart goes out to Hamza and Nadia and their family at this time, but I think Hamza's approach of visiting the synagogue in the south in Glasgow, and him speaking in the Parliament this week about how moved he was to have a Jewish lady there who's as worried for her family as he is for his, pray for his family. I mean, that's the humanity of what's happening here. Innocent people on both sides. Now, what happened with Hamas was horrendous, but Israel's response is against international law. And we know that, to cut the power, to cut the water supplies for the people of Palestine. We're talking about these people live in an area the size of Arran, so there is no opportunity to successfully bomb into that area and not risk civilians, innocent people being hurt. They have a right to defend themselves. And what has to happen now, and Monica mentioned this as well, we need the international community to come together to deal with this, to broker a lasting peace that gives justice to the people of Palestine and gives justice to the people of Israel and keeps them safe going forward. Gerald Kaufman predicted this. 2007 in the House of Commons, himself, an Israeli refugee from Poland, his family had come, and he predicted that if the West didn't come together, if the international community didn't come together for a peaceful two-state solution in this area, then the likelihood was what we've seen now. We can't make that mistake again.
Jim, I'll come to you in a second. Let me just hear some more from the audience. The man with the beard there. Yes, on you go.
I think Monica makes a really good point about international diplomacy, and Brian mentioned there's no winners in war. What can we do proactively as well to make sure this doesn't escalate elsewhere in the Middle East, looking at the communities in Lebanon and northern Israel that have been evacuated because of concerns that that might get involved at other parts of the area.
Joan McMahon.
80 years of geopolitics, I'm not clever enough to know enough about the geopolitics of 80 years, but I have listened to much cleverer people than me who say that the only solution long-term is a two-state solution. So the international community, in my view, should be trying to do is shackle Israel and the Gaza Strip and Palestinians to a two-state solution within a set period. So try and move to a situation where if you have a two-state solution, Israel has security and peace. And the one thing I do know, if you have Palestinian state, there will be a tsunami of money, help coming in from all around the world to make that a successful, healthy, livable place to be. So we can spend a huge amount of time saying this is a hellish situation. I think what we should be trying to do is to get both the parties and I say shackle them into moving towards a two-state solution, one that works for both sides.
Thank you. Your views on that at home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Lots of hands up. We spent about 15 minutes of that, and there's other things I want to get through tonight. So let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Jacqueline Lockhart. Jacqueline, evening.
What takes 475 phone calls and 2.5 hours out of your life and doesn't get you anywhere? Well, let me tell you, calling a GP surgery in Airdrie. Can the panel explain why, in a modern-day Scotland, I can call my GP 475 times in the allocated time slot, because you do get an allocated time slot, and I still don't get through to speak to either a receptionist or a GP? Note the hoarseness of the voice.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Clare Adamson.
It's something that I hear again in my casework a lot at the moment. It's very, very challenging at the moment for the health service. There's lots of people who didn't receive medical care during COVID, and there's lots of people seeking now to see their GPs, and it's a really difficult situation. The fact is, GPs are not part of the NHS in that they are independent of the NHS and are funded to and contracted to do work. So many will have different practices and different ways of working. My own GP uses a digital platform. I have my concerns about that, about digital inclusion and how accessible that is. But there are different models out there. But what we have to do is also look to the funded areas where is the GP the most appropriate health service.
Well, it was for Jacqueline. Hence 475 calls.
Yeah, but we need to use our community pharmacies. We need to understand that the community pharmacies can now prescribe.
That are doctors, I've spoken to relatives that are nurses. I have had this for 6 weeks now, and I could not get through to any doctor last week at all. None. I'm only giving you an example of one day. And I appreciate that they're not totally funded by the NHS, but they're real responsibility under the Scottish Government. So therefore, what I'm asking for is, what can be done about this? Who's monitoring it? Because I can tell you now, there'll be people going about Airdrie and probably all over Scotland who do have undiagnosed illnesses and conditions who's going to cost the NHS much more money later on in time. So it's actually going to be a vicious cycle, and it's not going to stop.
Yeah, Clare, I'll come back to you in just a second. The GPs are part of the NHS in Scotland, independent practitioners, but they're part of the NHS in Scotland.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But they are individual businesses, if you like, that are contracted to the NHS to provide that service. So one of the things we can look at is more recruitment for salaried GPs within the NHS to try and augment some of this.
2,000 short at the moment.
We need better recruitment. Part of that is the demographic of the GPs, but what is a real struggle is whether it's an area that people want to go into now. They want to commit. So my sister's a retired GP. She committed to a community for her entire working life and became a partner. That's all a model that is really challenging going forward.
Well, the BMA say one in 4 GPs in Scotland are thinking of getting out in the next 2 years. Monica Lennon, what do we do about this?
Well, first of all, Jacqueline is owed an apology. And I know maybe Clare can't speak for the government, but you are the party of government. So Jacqueline is owed an apology. I'm one of the MSPs for your region, so if I can get your details tonight or tomorrow morning, we need to go on to NHS Lanarkshire and get this sorted, because it's really serious. You need to get through to your GP and to get that appointment. But there are thousands of Jacquelines across Scotland right now. 1 in 7 people in Scotland are stuck on waiting lists. Clare's made some important points about who is the best person to see. That might be community pharmacy, but the reality is there are far too many people right now not getting the care they need. This morning in the Scottish Parliament, I was appearing at the Public Petitions Committee to support a local woman from this area, in the Motherwell area, whose partner sadly died by suicide, and that was before the pandemic. She has been campaigning to get a deep review of mental health provision. This was a crisis before the pandemic happened in terms of workforce planning and resources for the NHS. So this morning that committee agreed to make representations to the Scottish Government and to get the Parliament to try and do a bit more. But it's a life or death situation. We've also got a situation right here in the Motherwell and Wishaw area where the Scottish Government, and Clare agrees with the Government on this, that they want to downgrade Wishaw's neonatal intensive care unit, which, if you don't already know, is the best in the UK, award-winning. The staff are amazing, and the constituents who've been in touch with me across Lanarkshire, they are so angry and upset and so worried.
Well, let's hear from them tonight. Lady in the striped dress down there, yeah.
So, touching on both your points, with the reconfiguration of neonatal services in Scotland, but we'll see the downgrade in a Wishaw neonatal, but also another 4 neonatal units across Scotland. Has the wider impact of that been taken into account? Because it's not going to just affect the mums and babies that are being moved to Glasgow and Edinburgh and Aberdeen. It's going to affect the Scottish Ambulance Service that's going to be transferring these pregnant women. It's going to affect people that are going into have babies, like maternity care, because there's midwives that are going to have to be going on these transfers with the pregnant women, and God forbid these babies deliver in ambulances by the side of the road, because it'll not be in their best interest to be delivered in an ambulance or to be delivered and then moved, because that affects morbidity or mortality for these small sick babies massively.
Thank you. And lady down here on the second row, yeah.
So I'm on a waiting list. I was referred, I finally got through to my doctor, and that was December 21. So they keep you in this little holding circle for a while. I then finally got to see a hospital consultant in the June. So that waiting time from June till now, in anybody's mind, would be, what, 15 months? So I queried it, and it's 20 weeks. So I went, that can't be right. And if anybody doesn't know this, Scotland's one of the countries that keeps switching the clock on and off, on and off, on and off. Apparently there's legislation to say you keep me up to date, you keep me in the loop. I've got an apology because once I had my diagnosis, they did a scan, I never heard anything. So I kept chasing them up and saying, what's going on, what's going on? Surprise, surprise, the clock had switched off between the actual scan and the consultant coming back to me. And you could argue, is that a ploy? Is that a way to artificially reduce waiting times? But how you can join a waiting list nearly 20 months ago and the waiting time's probably 20 weeks, in anybody's mind, that's not right. So if there's anything the elected members can do on that, we should be recording waiting times, the same as other countries, the same as England, any other country in the world. When you are referred, that's when your clock starts.
OK, thank you. Brian Whittle.
I mean, the way we look at health in Scotland was actually the reason I got into politics in the first place. And you know, I came into politics with the idea that what we need to be doing is pushing resource further upstream into the preventative agenda. So, because at the moment, the government will tell you they're doing record investment into the health service, yet we have the biggest waiting times. We have my daughter's actually is actually a midwife, and my grandson was born at Wishaw. So it's something that is very close to my heart. But you know, Monica, you know, you've been in Parliament for as long as I have, and we have discussed, you know, waiting times, we've discussed the shortage of GPs, we've discussed the shortage of nurses, we've discussed the shortage of midwives, we've discussed workforce planning. For the whole time that I've been in Parliament, and nothing has happened. And the thing about it is that we're just not training enough GPs, we're not training enough nurses, we're not training enough midwives. When my daughter became a midwife, there was 44 places and over 400 applicants. So there was never a shortage of people who wanted to do the job. There's not a shortage in Scotland of people who want to be doctors. There is a cap on the number of doctors that are allowed to go through university in Scotland. And if you look at the reason for that, a university will get £2,500 a year from a Scottish student. They'll get £9,000 a year from an English student and nearly £30,000 a year from a Chinese student. Do you wonder why we have students or pupils in Scotland who want to become GPs, who want to become nurses, who want to become midwives and can't get on the list?
You've also got doctors south of the border who are on strike over pay.
The other thing we have, we are devolved completely. The NHS is completely devolved to Scotland. So if you're a Scottish, as has come through my post bag, if you're a Scottish student who wants to say, OK, I can't get into my course because there's a cap, but I'll pay, you can't. So you have to go to an English university, and once you're down there, we're losing them. Forever we've had this problem with, we haven't had enough GPs. I remember having this conversation with Jean Freeman, having this very debate with Jean Freeman, so, oh, we'll train an extra 800 doctors. We're now 2,000 short. We are in a crisis here, but we need to look at healthcare in a different way.
Well, the UK as a whole invests less in its health service than other European countries. So England's in the same position, and although health is completely devolved, as Brian said, we are still dependent on the settlement that we get from the UK government. So we need a longer term look at how we invest in health. And I know that during the independence referendum, we did talk about the future of the NHS and being able to invest the long-term investment that it was needed. And I think, you know, the chickens are coming home to roost. You know, like our health services is struggling. I did want to go back to the lady's point about calling the GP, though, because it seems to me, and I think Clare mentioned this, that different GPs have different ways of doing things in terms of the booking. That's completely unacceptable, you not to be being able to get through to your GP. And I know from personal experience, family experience, and also when I was an MSP, that different GPs do have different ways of doing things. And you need to be able to, if you're not getting that service that your GP is contracted to provide, you need to have a way that you can tackle that and deal with that. And I think that's where the government needs to come in, because although they're independent, it's just totally unacceptable.
OK, Jim McMahon?
The crisis is at least now causing people to be able to say, is the NHS working? And up until 3 or 4 years ago, nobody was allowed to say that. It was a shibboleth, it was almost a religion. You could not say, it's not just about money, it might be about other things. This crisis has caused people to step back, I think, and say, and the Labour Party are now saying, West Streeting's now saying, it's not just about money. And it's back to the same point, as Brian said, there's a shortage of doctors, a demographic issue. That's not something that's happened overnight. That could be seen years ago that might happen. So you plan earlier. And if we're going to do it, again, let's step back and let's say, what are we trying to do? What's the interaction between hospitals and social services? How can that help? Let's move to preventative medicine much more, getting things doing. There's a huge raft of things that can be done that are not just money. And I think it was Obama said something like, never waste a good crisis. So there is a crisis. Questions are now being asked about what's the right way to run the health service. Is the way we're doing it good? You're right, John, other countries pay more, but they have a much, much better health service than we have. And for years we've believed we have the world's best health service. We can't say anything about it because that's somehow not patriotic. We are now at least asking questions about, is it the best? Does it work? And how can we make it work better over the next?
And I think the COVID inquiry will expose that. You know, like the COVID inquiry will expose the fact that we didn't have the capacity to deal with COVID is because of long-term planning, as you say.
Evidence started on that this week, of course. Your views on all of it? Hashtag is BBCDN on social media. I want to squeeze in one final question this evening, which comes from Jane McLennican. Jane.
Okay. The UK Government Education Secretary has just announced that parents in England have a right to see materials used in their children's sex education classes, a right currently denied to parents in Scotland. Should the Scottish Government change its policy?
Now, the Scottish Government is currently consulting on changes to sex education in schools. That's going on up until next month. Jane, you say denied access to the materials. What's been your experience?
OK, well, what's happening in Scotland at the minute in schools is that we have a range of independent providers, other organisations, third-party organisations, who are being given contracts and in some cases getting huge amounts of government funding to produce materials that are being delivered within schools. So we have, including nursery, primary-age children, getting taught lessons in school that are saying to them that they could be children that are, for example, have been born in the wrong body, that they are not really boys and girls, they're really the opposite sex, and that you can change sex, which of course is biologically impossible.
Forgive me, Jane, we're just short on time on this, and I want to get round all the panel. Thank you for explaining what you mean by your question. Let's go first to you on this, Joan. What do you think?
Yes, I totally agree with you. If I had children in school, now my children are grown up, then I would want to see what they were being taught. You mentioned the whole issue of gender and telling children that they're born in the wrong body. I mean, it's a bit like if someone was pushing extreme religious beliefs down your children's throat. You wouldn't want that to happen. You want to know what was being taught to them. And to me, telling children that they've been born in the wrong body and that sex is a spectrum is like some wacko religious belief, and I certainly would want to know what my children were being taught. There's other issues as well. There's other issues. Can I just? Very quickly, there are other issues. Like I've seen videos in the past where it suggested that pornography was relatively harmless when a lot of pornography and should be used in certain ways. And pornography, most pornography now is totally abusive to women. And so children should be taught consent. They should have sex education, but they should be taught consent and they should be taught respect.
So, Clare Adamson, is the issue these external agencies providing these materials in school? Because that then gets into the copyright thing again. Should parents be able to access all this stuff?
So I think what's appropriate is what the educators want to do. And this goes back to the point of the neonatal unit.
What about the parents?
The neonatal unit as well. The neonatal decisions in North Lanarkshire were clinically led and for patient safety. As a politician,
So
I don't think it's appropriate for me
the question.
to say this. But the same principle applies. It should be the experts within the school. It should be the teachers that decide that.
If it's a third-party organisation, who determines the expert?
All of the materials that are used in schools are approved by the General Teaching Council, are approved by Education Scotland. We have organisations across different areas, from science, from other areas, providing materials to be used in schools.
Okay.
I think we leave it to the experts.
All right, Jim McMahon, leave it to the experts, leave it to the educators.
Leaving aside the gender issues and all that stuff, I just find it very strange that there are outside parties who are providing stuff for schools to promulgate. I'm surprised by that. I don't think it's correct. And the issue around saying it can't be put out anywhere because of copyright, I just isn't right. Isn't right legally, I don't think. It's not right commercially either. If anyone signed up to an agreement whereby education material isn't able to be passed on to other folk who want it, then they've signed to the wrong agreement. That should not be the case.
Monica Lennon?
So I know we're running out of time and we can't debunk some of that, but look, there's some important principles being raised here. We need to have a school system and a country where young people have their rights respected, can learn about consent and relationships, because believe me, sexual harassment is rife in our schools and in our communities. And we need to have a Scotland where LGBT people have the right to exist, including children. So some of that might be uncomfortable for some parents and for some people, but the reality is that there are some in society, I'm not saying anyone in this audience, but there are some who want no discussion about LGBT
But should
people.
parents have the
and
right
no
to see the
discussion.
materials, is the question, Monica?
Well, I'm not aware of anyone being denied access to any information, so I would look at details of that. I didn't accept the premise of the question. I am a parent. I have a daughter who's 17, who's in her final year at school, so I've been dealing with the school as a parent for quite a long time, so I don't recognise that.
All right, Brian Whittle.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, my daughter, my eldest daughter is head of guidance at a school, and it's an absolute mess. And she's not allowed to tell parents what they've been taught. So you're absolutely right. So what's happening in our schools just now, far be it from me to agree with Joan, I've not done that very often, but that's absolutely correct. I, as a parent, I've got a 15-year-old daughter as well. I, as a parent, have the right to know what my children are being taught. I am the parent of that child, and it's my responsibility. So you should not be able to hide a curriculum from a parent. It's just absolute nonsense.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me hear from the audience. No, hang on a second. Lady in the back row, on you go.
To my knowledge, I am a student. I am 17 years old. I have went through the sex ed curriculum. To me, it's very behind. There is absolutely nothing to do with LGBTQ plus people. There's absolutely nothing to do with gender. It's simply, here is sex, here's how to stop a baby happening, here's how a baby's made, and that's about it. You cover it in biology and you cover it in PSE. But to my knowledge, if my mum and dad ask me, oh yeah, what were you taught? I'm more than welcome to go and tell them exactly what I've been taught. So I'm really confused as to where the limits
This may be why the Scottish Government is reviewing what's being taught in schools at the moment. Gentleman with the beard there, yes.
Yeah, basically, I've been invited to a school in primary school where they've discussed what the new sex education would look like. And I think that some of the things that I've heard from the comments in the debate around this, I think there's full outrage on this. And I think it's rolled into things like gender recognition. And what I think is sex education is important because we need to stop teen pregnancies. Yep. We need to make sure that boys grow up respecting girls. Yep. And also we need to make sure that we don't roll back those LGBTQ plus rule laws that we have now. And I think people are taking their culture wars and rolling it into this, and that's detrimental to kids.
Thank you very much indeed. We could debate this on and on this evening, but I'm afraid we're out of time. But keep your views coming on social media. The hashtag is BBCDN. That's it for tonight. Next week, we're with you from Stirling. You can apply to be part of the audience for that on our website. If you missed any of tonight's show, it's repeated later on BBC One Scotland or any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight, to our audience here in Motherwell. Great to be with you for the first time. We'll be back. And of course, to you at home for watching. We'll see you next week from Stirling. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.